Welcome to Living in Connection, where we explore the nature of physical and non-physical reality and what that means in your life.
Hello and welcome back. We just completed talking about robots, and we had more to go in there and doing them for a positive purpose. So, Frank, why don't you lead us off here?
All right. In that minute or two that we just paused, it occurred to me that we don't want to give the impression that robots are a bad thing. They're not a bad thing. They're not a good thing. They can be used for better or worse, like everything else in life. And it occurred to me one way you could define a robot is a sort of an executor of crystallized intentions. If you're an artist and you want to become a better artist, you better practice and practice and practice and practice. Well, how different is that from saying you have a robot that you're leaning on, and some people think of it in terms of routine. There was I forget if it was Pablo Casals, some really famous musician, and he still practiced every day when he was in his 80s. And they asked him, why do you still practice? He says, because I think I'm close to getting it now. Well,
I didn't get that.
He must have had 60 or 70 years worth of the same robot helping him keep his continuity. And I, myself, continuity is a very difficult thing for me. You wake up the next day and you forget what you were working on. Well, your robots are there to help you if you set them up that way. And come to think of it, Dirk, supposing you look at your character flaws, that is to say, anything that you do kind of against your own will and you want to do differently, you could set up robots to help you make the right decisions rather than the wrong ones, I believe.
Well, just as an aside on that, I didn't know until much later in my life that I have OCD. Now, mine's of a particular form, and as it turns out, as a kid, I learned to redirect my OCD. And it basically became that I redirected it into learning and to understanding things. And so what ended up happening then is I would continually ask the question why, and I couldn't stop till I got to the bottom. But there would be simple ways where it really shows up in strange ways. Like I started playing with essential oils at one point, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But after I had collected about 3 or 4 of them, I suddenly had to have the whole set. Well, you're never going to have the whole set, but I've got about 100 of them now. And I use them periodically for all kinds of different things. But it was part of that OCD thing, and it's part of the robot redirection that I did that caused that.
Do you have any recollection of consciously repurposing that particular robot?
I do. Yeah. It would be things. OCD causes you to do repeated actions that are not necessarily to your benefit.
Sure.
And when I realized I was doing that, I realized that wasn't helpful, and I redirected it to do things that would be helpful.
All right. And it was simpler. It was easier done than said, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
And I want to continually emphasize that to people here. Most of these things are decisions. They're simple decisions. You make the decision and your life changes. It doesn't require long apprenticeship. What somebody said about laboratories and scientists? He said, all the expensive equipment in the laboratory is designed just to turn the scientist's head in a certain direction.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very good way to put it, All the preparation may be necessary, may not be necessary, but ultimately it's going to be a decision.
Oh, I think some other common examples of that may be people who say they've moved. They can't go to bed until all the boxes are unpacked and everything is put away. They just do it.
If I had done that, I would have years of being awake.
Exactly. But it's that kind of thing. That is a robot in its own. It's And if you're not aware of it, it can be destructive in your life. But if you're aware of it, it can be hugely constructive. So
Oh,
go
no,
for it.
go on.
I was just going to say where you're going. Let's talk to our guys and see what they have to say.
That's just what I was going to say. Let's see what your guys have to say. You first.
Okay. Let's see. Are we awake yet?
They're drinking their coffee. You know.
Well, no, it's more about am I awake yet? Okay, pause. All of what you say is true, and there is actually a great deal more to know about this. The robots that you're talking about are fairly simple forms of what's possible, and we object, at least for our part, we object a little bit to the word robot, that these are, as you guys talked about between your discussions, more involved in intention and goals and related. The only aspect in which they're robots is that they're occurring autonomously. They're running on their own. But you have control over them and you can constantly adjust them if you're aware that they're there. The big problem is being aware, to consciously know that you have these things occurring within you. The analogy to programming is useful. We would recommend that you don't take it too far. But the idea that you have some set of code running that says do these things in this sequence or this way, that's a useful idea. And it's a way that you can hold in your mind fairly easily in order to be able to understand what's happening and to recraft it, I guess is what they're going to do, recraft it so that it's useful for other things, or to recognize when it ceases to be of use to you so that you can end it and do something else instead.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I know when we did of course, nobody plays with exe files anymore anyway. That goes back to DOS. But at the time, it seemed a very good analogy because it's something you created. It's going to run until you tell it to change. And the only way to change it is call it into consciousness, change it, and resave it, and you're done. I see their point about robots. However, I can actually, I begin to see their point about, in a way, we're depersonalizing what is much more conscious and much more personalized. But there is that robotic element in it, which is to say, yes, it's working on its own, but it shouldn't be working on its own. It should be doing what we want, not what it wants. And so it becomes a matter of our consciousness again.
I think that was exactly their point.
Yeah, and it's a good point, because whether you call it an exe file or a robot or a trauma or I don't know, so all those things tend to diminish the idea about their essential autonomous consciousness and make them into things, and that's a linguistic problem, I
think. They also want to jump in more. Something else that you need to recognize is that there are many layers within yourselves and many fractionations of your whole, that your minds, your bodies, and all of the rest of the things that exist in 3D and beyond have discrete separations within them, or nearly so. There's overlap, of course, but what you end up seeing is that for the things that you're talking about as robots, some of them occur at a very deep level within the brain, where the functions are occurring almost without your knowledge and control. And quite often those are occurring driven by emotions and feelings. For some of the others, they occur at higher levels in the mind and they're more amenable to control. But in all cases, you have the ability to insert and change the operations that are occurring. Knowing that you can is the first step. Knowing then how to do it is the next.
My guys want to piggyback on that, I think, and that is, remember that we have said that the universe is fractal, that at every different layer, regardless of what a layer is, every different layer will have the same repeating kind of structure. And right now, to this point, you've been talking about yourselves as individuals, but remember that you are a fractal of the larger thing that you're a part of, and you're a fractal of the smaller things that make you up. And all of those same processes will have their analogs at each of those levels. We can't deal with everything. We can't make every example infinitely large, but we just mention it because whenever you deal with anything, at some point you come to a point where you could continue it out and follow it in new places or not. It doesn't matter which you do. That's your choice. We're just saying don't let yourself think that it's more limited than it is. Recognize that there are no ultimate limits, but that for practical purposes, everybody chooses to limit things to a certain degree. Some people, their boundaries are huge. Some people's boundaries are not actually under their conscious control. They take life as if it were given. But within that large span, it is a choice. And the choice of context will determine how it seems to you that the world obviously is. Well, nobody can argue that. It's clearly this. And when you hear somebody say that, it's because they've got a certain construct of reality that is a combination of what we've been calling robots, but also of consciousnesses, of the strands and consciousnesses and robots of all directions, in all directions, that come toward you, that are part of you, and that are interacting with you. It's a very large subject, and we would like to do is have it obviously practical for an individual, and at the same time, not instead of, to have the individual get the sense of, yes, and this is part of a huge cosmic pattern. That way it'll be the best of both worlds.
I think the other thing that my guys wanted to insert was the idea that even though in general terms, pretty much there's a common suite of tools about how you can go about changing these things, there are differences depending upon exactly how the robots are set up or what layer they're in, how they're involved. And so if you develop one tool to do it, it's kind of like having a hammer in your toolbox and nothing else. It becomes much more difficult to adjust things well. It's better to develop a whole bunch of tools.
I find it relatively easy to use a hammer to put a screw in. Not so easy to pull the screw out that way.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what have we left out that will be practical for somebody to recognize the upside as well as the downside of the fact that a lot of our lives are automatic rather than under our conscious control? Anything? We may have covered the territory.
Well, there's a lot, but there's also more. One of the things that they're suggesting to me is that many of the tools that you have available, things like Ho'oponopono and others, approach the problem in a completely different way, where it's about loving your whole self for who you are. And that quite often, if you approach it in a different way, you may end up, unfortunately, because of the way society works, feeling that you've done wrong or blaming yourself or otherwise doing things that end up actually creating a bigger problem than is actually there.
Just for clarity, that's not the same thing as saying you approve of everything you've done,
Right.
but you hate the sin, you love the sinner.
Exactly.
I think Carl Jung said, I've lost it now. It's not the same one I was giving you before. This is a different one that I actually have used a lot. Maybe it'll come back. Maybe it won't. But I agree with all of that.
Well, the other one,
I know what it is. He said, condemnation never liberates. It oppresses.
Right.
Only understanding liberates. And it goes for ourselves and our opinion of ourselves as much as our opinion of other people. And I think it's a very big stumbling block for people to get to the point where they can actually say, well, I don't approve of what I did, but I did the best I could at the time.
well, and one of the things they're telling me is to suggest that, and you would know far more about this than I, that as one example of that within the Catholic Church is the rite of confession.
Confession is a great thing. And Carl Jung actually compared it to psychoanalysis because it's a way. And you know what? Here's this may not be what Jung was talking about, but here's one aspect of it. Having confessed it, meaning having put it into words and given it to somebody else to hear, you can no longer pretend to yourself that it didn't happen. Right. And I think that is the transformative part. It isn't that somebody else got to hear it. I mean, I'm not going to argue with people's religious views on it, and there's probably nothing wrong with the way they're seeing it. But psychologically, I think the actually having to call it into consciousness and put it out there in such a way that you can no longer pretend to yourself that you don't remember doing that. I think that's a big part of the healing process.
Well, and then also taking responsibility and
Same
doing
thing.
things to correct for what you did.
Well, at least as I remember it, I haven't been a member of the church for many, many decades. But as I remember it, it wasn't so much about atonement in the sense of Alcoholics Anonymous. I think that's the organization where they say you have to try and make up to everybody for everything you did. And I know that that would have a great therapeutic effect, but that wasn't exactly what confession was doing. Confession was trying to get you realigned.
Right.
I've never heard anybody put it that way, but I think that's what it amounts to.
The other one they wanted us to go to was something we had talked about between the two recordings here is going back to the idea of intention and how that can be involved with this.
As I said before, it's very difficult for me, not apparently for you. Maybe a little OCD is good for us, but it's hard for me to maintain continuity.
Mhm.
I will make all these notes to myself, and I'll even have I've had notebooks with agenda, thinking that would, and it doesn't do it for me. It's a week can go by and I totally forgot what I was working with. And there's not senility. Senility is a sort of an extra bonus that I'm looking forward to. But it's any kind of habit or anything you can rely on that's automatic would be helpful in that condition. The guys have often said about habit is just a way of something to lean on.
Right. That doesn't get us yet to intentions, but just continuing on that for a moment. One of the things I know in my life is two aspects. One is I can't do deadlines. And I actually had to set up robots to avoid deadlines, where if I had a boss who ever gave me a deadline to do something, the only thing I could assure you is that I'm going to miss the deadline.
Because, I remember, but let's stay in the present on this one.
Well, the whole point of that, though, was that in recognizing that, I created a robot to help me where I would accomplish tasks before I was ever asked for them so that I would never trigger that defect.
You never thought, by the way, I remember the story very well, but it didn't occur to me before. You never thought to reprogram the robot that had a problem with deadlines?
I tried like crazy, and I never found the answer to that one. It was a loop of some sort, and I could never figure out how to break the loop. And I still haven't. But anyway, that's just an aside that, there can be things like that where robots can be very helpful, though they can also create their own ripples.
Well, Dirk, I'm not sure it is an aside because that's a major thing for people. If you have a robot and you can't figure out how to break it, all of the things we've talked about are like Paradise Lost. They don't.
They can be.
What could you have done, or what could you do now that would help you to identify? I don't know if we need to identify. Wait, let me ask the guys. Some of the things that you think are disruptive in your lives actually have effects that are productive, and it's like that's the downside of an upside. We're not saying this is necessarily true, but it is one reason why every time you find something in your life that you think is a mistake or is a defect or whatever, you can't automatically just change it by wanting to.
Right.
That would not be in your best interest. In fact, that's why you're in 3D in the first place, to get the delayed consequences of having to live through it. Having said that, though, Dirk's method was a workaround, a practical workaround, and that was well and good. If the problem had been bigger, if it had had more emotional roots, if it had had more traumatic or disabling side effects, then it would have been probably necessary to go in and reprogram that robot. But even that, we don't want to complicate this too much, but even fixing something has consequences. And
it does.
One thing and something else might break, so it as with most things, it's simple in concept, but not so simple in execution.
Well, the basics of what this one was, as I tried to explore it, it wasn't a robot from conscious thought. It wasn't, that kind of an algorithm. It also wasn't from emotional thought. It was someplace else. And the best I could figure it was that it had to do with as soon as I had a deadline, I entered into a state where it's akin to Zen, where everything stops. In
Yes,
programming terms, it's like it hit a stop codon. It's an end program.
but the question would be why that happened.
Exactly. And I could not or did not find the origin of it to know what that was.
The guys are indicating, I mean, if I'm reading them right, they're saying it was an important assist to you, even
In
though,
some way.
yeah, even though it had not unpredictable, but it had unsatisfactory side effects, you know.
The other one that I get is I have a long, though not perfect memory. And because of that, I'll have all kinds of things that are projects that I started at some point that I intended to continue that stalled at some point. And the thing I have happen now is as I have time, I'll have something come up and I'll think, well, that's interesting. And it will suddenly trigger remembrance of the associated things in the past. And suddenly those projects are alive again, just as if they never had paused.
Well, if you ever read 3 or 4 books at a time, you put one book down and you pick up another book and your mind is back where you left it.
Exactly.
It's a very peculiar thing. I've thought of it many times, you know. You can count on it, but it's a strange thing. It's last Thursday I stopped at this chapter. I'm not a week later. It's right the same moment, you know. And
Exactly.
by the way, you were talking about intentions and I was talking about continuity, and you thought that was a distinction, but to me, it's the same thing.
Well, where I'm going with intentions is the idea that we can essentially create something akin to robots with an intention, where we think through some particular issue or feel through some particular issue and frame it in such a way that there's no negation involved, frame it in such a way that the language is true now as well as in the future. Intend that, request that to be the case, and put it out into the world, essentially like a thought form in a way, or like a robot in a way. No, more like a thought form, but put it out into the world where it interacts with others and amazing things happen.
Well, there's got to be some strange things involved here, because I've written and published many books, and I've written and not published many more books, or a few more. Right. And I've researched and been ready to write others that I couldn't write. I cannot tell you the difference between one and another. Why should one be able to be executed pretty easily? Why should another one go on for several months but still be executed easily? And another one go on for years and never get anywhere near being done, you know? And there undoubtedly there's a reason, but I don't know what it is, and I can't find it.
Well, I think that's akin to my problem with deadlines. That particular origin of that is one that's evading you.
Well, that doesn't feel right. I mean, it may be right, but it doesn't feel right. Because, for instance, I wanted to write a book, Thoreau and Mr. Emerson, and it's only been about 55 years now that I've been wanting to write that book. And I don't think I'm going to get it written, but I don't know why.
Oh, it'll be next week.
No, I don't think so. Or last year, I spent 8 months writing a novel, came almost to the end of it, realized, no, this won't do. It has to be rewritten. I'm pretty sure I'll never be able to rewrite it. I don't understand it. Maybe it's not necessary for me to understand it, but I really don't. You would think it would be the same process. If I had never been able to complete a manuscript, or if I had never had the confidence that having completed it, I could get it published, or any of those things, that would be one thing. But to have done it many, many times, and then have these other things where you just cannot get off the dime, is very peculiar. I don't understand it.
Well, I've had something similar to that, where involved at work, I would have a task that I needed to do. The boss had assigned me, or I had assigned myself. And so long as I can do it in my way, which involved some sort of an internal recursive analysis where I'm doing things, I'm essentially doing the entire project in my head. Now, I may be out gathering information and whatnot, but I'm processing it all internally. And until it finally reaches a particular place, then it all comes out as one. But if I have in that, say, my boss comes along and wants to see where I'm at, and I'm, say, 60% done, that freezes it at that 60%, and it now becomes extremely difficult to do the next 40%.
Okay, follow this, because I can't. when you said that, I heard the difference between waves and particles being
Similar.
oscillating. Why? What's the continuity there?
Well, if you think of it in those terms, the processing internally is like the wave. It's in motion. It's
Yes,
fluid.
yeah.
As soon as it's been made concrete, you've now frozen that wave. You've frozen that to make it very difficult to adjust it in all the ways it needs to.
That's what I was saying, but how and why?
That it goes back to my loop on deadlines of I'm not sure how that works. That's one of my open questions.
Yeah, it's a big question too. Anyway, this isn't going to help the people who are watching this. Well, it'll show them that we don't have all the answers.
Oh,
They should
certainly.
know that. I hope they would know that.
What else have we missed here?
I think it was a good thing to talk about the fact that we do depend upon robots every day. They're not bad things. And even if they come up with effects that we now think are bad, it's not because they're bad or evil or ill-disposed or badly formed or accidental. It's just because circumstances changed and they haven't yet. And it's up to us to change the circumstances, which we can do.
Well, and there's another piece. They're reminding me that there are a lot of robots that are operating within us that are seemingly beyond our control quite intentionally. Within medicine, they talk about the autonomic nervous system and whatnot. There are things like having your heart beat and breathing and whatnot that are under algorithmic control, but they're not under conscious awareness control.
And that's good.
Most of the time, and that's a good thing. And they are robots running on their own that you don't have to worry about, you don't have to take care of. And actually, it's better that you don't.
As you say that, I'm getting the sense, doesn't quite make sense, but almost, we are robots in a degree. We are probably robots to the next higher level of consciousness. It may be.
Marionettes.
No. Well, do you feel like you have no freedom of choice? I don't.
No.
But it may be that when we experience what we call the higher self or the higher consciousness, maybe that's the equivalent of them bringing us up to their level of consciousness and rearranging things to give us a little more freedom, or to say, okay, you really want to go this way, not that way. Maybe, you know what? Maybe that's what a decision is. Or no, that's not quite the way to put it. Maybe that's the way a decision becomes possible. We bring our problem, whatever it is, to a higher level. It's readjusted and brought down. And then we feel like, well, what a good boy am I? I just decided that I'm going to do this, I don't know. This is all winging it, but I think there's something in that, actually.
Well, I remember when I first heard the story of Pinocchio, I ended up with a dream a night or two after, where I'm right back into that scene of, Pinocchio and whatnot, and him realizing that, he's on strings. And so he climbed the strings and managed to grab a scissor and cut them all and took off.
He fell on the floor in a heap, which is what would happen.
In reality.
Well, I have a friend, and you do too, who believes that all of our lives are predestined, but it doesn't feel like that.
No.
And it doesn't make any sense like that. There is predestination involved in it. There is also free will involved. I don't think it's one or the other at all. But you can be a marionette if you want. I don't feel like a marionette.
Never have. Well, I hope we've done something useful here for folks.
I'm always satisfied if we haven't subtracted from the sum total of human knowledge.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, next time.
Next time. Have a great day.
You too.
If you enjoyed this episode, please press like. Please press subscribe to stay informed of new episodes as they appear. We would love to hear from you in the comments section below, and we wish you the very best in connecting with your own guidance.